We continue our study on the Gospel of Matthew. We will be looking at chapter 14 and verses 32 and 33. Now, one of the things that we need to be aware of when we pick up a gospel like the Gospel of Matthew is to understand that each of these gospel writers, in a sense, were not free to write just what they want. They understood that as they presented their life of Jesus, where the focus is on the ministry of Jesus and who and what he really was, they did so in a context where they were operating out of the church. So, in a sense, this is a very different exercise than somebody who sits in in a house office writing a novel, for example, where there is no constraints or checks and balances on what they write. They have the freedom to do what they want. So while we talk of each of these gospels as a product of an individual, it would be a mistake to say them as exclusively individualistic. They were also a product of the church and the church's guarding of the sacred tradition of who and what Jesus is. Matthew chapter 14 and verses 32 and 33. Reading from the New King James Bible. And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Then those who were in the boat came and worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." The words of verse at the end of verse 33 are of tremendous significance. It is also in the same breath not clear exactly what they mean. Now, we understand post-resurrection what they mean. But at this time and at this place, in the middle of the lake, in the middle of that boat, what did those people actually mean by those words? I'm not saying that they were not sincere in what they said. That word sincere can kind of be overworked and overplayed. They might have been sincere in what they said, but there's clearly some deficiency in their understanding of who Jesus is. You see, they had seen the forces of nature submit to Jesus. They knew that he was powerful. These people were Jewish, and so would see that which was at work in Jesus was the power of God. The question is, did they see Jesus as the God in the flesh? The answer, based on what transpires in the rest of the gospel, is no. Yes, they knew God was present, but they did not fully understand what that meant and who Jesus truly was. Now, I'm not here to lambaste the disciples for their failure to, at this point in time, to articulate a full Trinitarian understanding of God in light of the early church creeds such as Nicene or Constantinople or Chalcedon. No, that's not what we're talking about here. I think you have to understand how people do not always come to a full understanding of God at one point in time. It is sometimes very much a journey. Take, for example, the great Christian apologist C.S. Lewis, also the writer of the Narnia series of children's books. Lewis, the Anglo-Irish writer, dates are 1898 to 1963. Now, a number of things happened in Lewis's life: death of his mother, the First World War, serving there, so on and so forth, that pushed Lewis to be, as a young adult, an atheist. But there came a point and place in his young life where he went from being an atheist to a theist. But do not think that Lewis at that point was Christian. Even he recognized that he was not. What there was an opening up within himself intellectually to the reality that there had to be a God. He still had a long way to go to understand what that meant. He became a theist, which is not the same thing as a Christian. If he had stopped there, he still would have been lost. Once he became a theist, it opened up to him the possibility that the Christian faith was true. This would be the next step he would take. There are two things to take from the disciples and from Lewis. On the one hand, is that we have to allow people to process through their own understanding who Jesus is and what his relationship is to God. It can be very easy for the church to rush people to the end zone. We have to understand that rushing people to a commitment is probably in the long term not conducive to creating a vibrant faith. Jesus is able to help people work out the issues involved. Some people will put things together quicker, and some, and I would say most of us are like the disciples, it will take longer. A person who has worked through the issues in faith will be stronger in the faith than a person rushed to a commitment in Jesus Christ. The second thing we have to note is the negative. In the church, we need to take note how people use the language of God. And the way that people use it can point to the fact that they have no faith. We need to be careful in the church that we do not get just comfortable with the fact that, oh, the person is now speaking the language of the church. And because they are using that terminology, they, by necessity, must be of faith. People can use the language of the church and the language of the faith and be completely outside the faith. And there are, I won't say it's foolproof, but there are ways you can tell where people stand in faith or outside the faith. When people in the church can talk of God and can speak of God in kind of cold and distant and third person terms, that's probably a marker that it's not something real and legitimate. And often what I see or hear more precisely is that people can talk of God, but when they do not have faith, it becomes very difficult to speak of Jesus in more than a cold and clinical sort of way. If a person does not feel comfortable talking of Jesus as if he is God, then that person has not come to an understanding of who God is. Christian teaching is clearly centered on the fact that until you understand Jesus as God in the flesh, you are not truly understanding who God is. To understand God, you must understand that Jesus is God in the flesh.